I'm Chris Genti from Northport, New York. Class of '85, Brown. I was applied math economics major. Got my MBA at Columbia, concentration in accounting and finance. I spent about 6 years in investment banking in Chicago, and then the last 18 years doing venture capital. So why don't we kind of go this way.
Brian Smiga, played lax at Swarthmore, and did my master's degree at Trinity College, Dublin. I was a humanities major, and became an entrepreneur when I couldn't decide whether to get an MBA or an MFA. So I started learning software programming. And I have helped start 3 companies, which we'll talk about later, and I've gone over to the dark side. I'm now working in venture capital.
So Eric Gertler, originally from Montreal, Canada. Been in New York for about 20 years. Classmate of Chris's at Brown. I've sort of chuckled when Chris asked the questions, describe what you do, because it's a question that you're asking now, and if you're doing it right, you'll be asking yourself that same question for the next 50 years. Because you no longer have this traditional career. I started off as a journalist. I went to law school. I was a lawyer at Skadden Arps, doing media work. I moved to the media side. I was president of U.S. News and World Report, Fast Company Magazine, and The Atlantic. I then went out and started 3 businesses, wrote a book, and I'm now, because all this makes sense, I'm now working for the Bloomberg administration in government. So.
Elliot Brees. I'm class of '06 at Brown, modern culture and media major. In my second semester senior year at Brown, started a online music store called Amy Street with a few friends, and started off as a project. Sort of like, I think, we ended up turning in our business plan for several of our classes our second semester senior year. Our teachers were great. Went on to take that seriously and ran it for about 4 years before we ultimately sold it to Amazon. And yeah, so just been doing entrepreneurship stuff since Brown.
So from our group here, we've basically got sort of 3 constituents. We've got entrepreneurs. We've got a group of guys here who I've sort of called sort of mentors or working at accelerators, and then investors. And so we'll kind of group them up here, kind of one at a time. This is the entrepreneur panel. Okay, all these guys have started companies, at least one company, maybe more. And but they're sort of the true, sort of passion behind building the company. And so I guess thinking about sitting in that audience here, how does somebody know that entrepreneurship is for them? So why don't you guys, I want this to be kind of pretty free-flowing here, so feel free to, to jump in here. But we want to try to give these guys a sense for, how do I, if I'm sitting here, how do I know that entrepreneurship is for me? What does it take? What is it like? Why would I do it? Sort of try to give them advice that you would have liked to have heard sitting in their seats. So.
Well, one thing I really agree with is once you start a company and exit it, you really can't do anything else. So be prepared that if you go down this path, you might get into venture capital, you might get into advisory, but it's going to brand you, it's going to change you. I've started 3 companies, and I'd say, I always ask entrepreneurs, like, what's the origin story? What was the pain you felt or you saw other people felt that made you start this company? And to me, that's the first question. And if there's not a good answer to that question, probably not going anywhere. So I think one thing that drives us is just that we see a pain, just like you see an opportunity on the field, you see a chance to make a play, and you want to score the goal. You see a pain and you want to solve it. One last thing is, and a lot of entrepreneurs say this, so I'm just stealing their thunder, is when you start a new company and you solve a pain point, you can be the best in the world at that particular application. So, we're all competitive here, right? And we like to compete, we like to do great things, we like to build teams to do great things. Choose something you can do where you can be the best in the world at it, because that's part of why we're so turned on as entrepreneurs.
So let's just stick with that, because I think this is kind of important here. So these guys are out there and they see something, big need for something. well, I mean, maybe somebody else can kind of deal with that. Why should it be me? Is sort of the one thing. And then the other is, I guess even if you do, sort of decide that that it's going to be you, how should these guys be thinking about, do I really want to be that entrepreneur, sort of drive that, to the end? So what, is they, sort of giving them some insight, around that. I don't know if that makes sense.
So,
Yeah, you can jump in.
first of all, always take comments on entrepreneurialism from a guy with a tie with a great salt. So that's the first thing I say. But in fairness, I spent 15 years not wearing a tie before I got into government. So I think when you approach entrepreneurialism, and for me, it was a gradual process. When I started to think about entrepreneurialism, I was running a very large media company where I was president of U.S. News, Fast Company magazine at the Atlantic. And at the time, Fast Company was the magazine that really glorified entrepreneurialism. And I kept on reading about all these stories, and I had a great job. I had a job that, where I could meet with anybody, great resources, but something was gnawing at me that I really wanted to create something. It was in my DNA, and at the time I didn't know what it was. I just wanted to, do it. I wanted to be, and it was, for me, sort of a natural transition from, I started off as a journalist. As a journalist, you basically observe things, and you don't do anything. You sort of, and I have high respect for journalists, but you're sort of just an observer of what goes on. And I was a lawyer, and a lawyer, you're helping the person. There's a lot of problems out there. There's a lot of things that need, that need solutions. But you better, if you're the entrepreneur, want to really feel, the pain and the passion for solving it, because the road for entrepreneurialism is not easy, and you better just love it, because you're going to be with that forever. And if it's not something that, and don't just do it because you think there's a lot of money in, because that's not good enough. When I started my company Privista, which was an identity theft management, personal credit management company, it was all about, I just kept on, it was the early days of having email, and I got confused about, you'd have one email, you sign up for another site, and you would have, I was concerned about if I put my identity here and my password here, what happens? And it just kept on bugging me for a year. I just kept on going back to it, and realized that I would stay up at night thinking, this is going to be big, this whole idea of personal identity, and I just knew that I had to do something about it. And, of course, like many entrepreneurs, when I was ready to do something about it, it was the worst goddamn time to do it, because I did it just before September 11th. And if you think about what happened, and historically, privacy and identity were actually the top of people's concerns, top of Americans' concerns at the end of the 20th century. 9 months later, people could not care less about privacy. It was all about security. And when you talk to people about privacy, they were like, we don't care. And yet, here you are, you're dealing with this, and the funding's going away, and people aren't focusing on that. And that's why you shouldn't do it for the money, because it's a long road. You better just love it. So I'll stop there. And I'll turn to, by the way, Modest, there's a lot of great companies in New York. Songs is one of the great stories, and as from the Bloomberg administration, we love to cheer great companies. This is one of the great companies in New York. So
I appreciate that, and the Bloomberg administration has been awesome to us, so we are definitely thankful for that. I think starting off a good point, definitely wouldn't do it for the money, because there's generally not the money in it, especially compared to some of the fields that you guys have been talking about. It's always a crapshoot. But one thing that I think I'd like to stress is coming out of college and maybe thinking about going into entrepreneurship right out of college. We started our first company in college. People often ask me like, so what's your background in? And I was like, I don't have a background in it. And so it was awesome. And it was, and now that I've forged relationships with, entrepreneurs all over the world, and people at venture capital, I realized that it was sort of a really unique opportunity in college to start a company. I think it's still a unique opportunity. Things have changed. You know, there was the idea of accelerators was very young, if it existed at all, when I was graduating from school. And in a lot of ways, it sort of created somewhat of a safety net for going into entrepreneurship. But even without that, just thinking about your time now, as it becomes harder and harder to start companies as you get older and older. And I can't speak right now from a place of any sort of real age. You know, I'm approaching 30, so I'm still young. But as life happens, it doesn't become impossible. I think, as is evidenced by a lot of the entrepreneurs here. But as life happens, it definitely becomes harder. When we started our first company, we had very little to lose, and you know, my guess is that you know, we were in a very similar situation to a lot of the folks here. Which is all to say, I mean, there doesn't need to be a rush into any particular career path right out of college. It will change. You will change as you're doing it, and if there's even a slight itch to do something do something entrepreneurial, I mean, I think, you know, definitely scratch the itch, because it's an awesome. I mean, we started our first company. We moved from Providence to Hicksville, Long Island, in a house. We lived in a house. There was 6 of us at that point. You know, we ate snack wraps and French fries every day. We sort of burned hardly any cash. You know, we did a friends and family round, and then a small seed round from around alone, and it was fun. I mean, it was not much worse than we were living when we were in college. You know, it was critical for us to be able to live that way, and that's a way that I wouldn't live right now. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's when you think about some of the other sort of fields that you're going into, definitely consider entrepreneurship as something that you can just jump into, especially now, especially with all the support that you can get from accelerators. You can apply to, you know, programs as if you were applying to grad school at this point. So, you know, I think it's exciting, and the other fields will not only be there on the opposite end of that, they will be excited about you as a candidate going into any field if you try to start a company. When I interview tons of people now, and people that have ever tried to start a company, that's always a really attractive quality. And I think that's not just in startups. I think that's in most organizations.
So, you know, it's an interesting jump off there. You know, there's this, you know, old joke that, you know, why did Willie Sutton rob banks? Because that's where the money is. And, you know, a lot of you have said that you want to go into private equity or venture capital, and my sense is that, at least from your perspective, that there's a lot of money to be made there, and there is. I will tell you that in terms of the companies that I've been involved with, and the private equity people that I've worked with, and the venture capital I've worked with, by a long shot, the best VCs and the best venture capitalists are ones that have actually started a company and know what they're doing. I mean, Steve Brotman, who I don't think he's here right now, who's on the board of my last company. I mean, he was an entrepreneur. When I would walk through a problem, he understood it. He understood the timeline of getting a deal done. It wasn't, I was joking with Mike Persky, who Mike's also, a terrific private equity guy, because he's run companies, and it's not like sitting around a board where the board member says, yeah, just what you got to just do is just raise revenue and cut expenses, and like someone who's got to fill. I mean, there's a reason why David has advised 100 companies, because he starts companies and he knows what's involved with it. So as you think about it, sure, it's easy to go become a principal, but I will tell you that in the long run, if you understand what's really involved with building a company, you'll be much better at what you do.
I just want to underscore this with 2 more comments. First of all, we all know that you can never start learning lacrosse early enough, right? And so this comment that you could start a company while you're still at Brown really holds true, and it's never been more true. And we're at the intersection of mobile, big data, lots of trends that are favorable to the entrepreneur, including getting access to capital. And if you look backwards, there's a lot of good cases. Now, I want you all to graduate from Brown, but Steve Jobs dropped out of Reed, and Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard, and the Facebook team almost dropped out of Harvard to start 3 very big companies. And they all got started at college age. So I think even if you do a look back, those entrepreneurs that get started early, learn fast, fail fast, get back up. So the time is now.
Right. Well, you've highlighted three exceptional companies here. I think the vast majority of companies that are founded end up not going anywhere, end up failing, just plain and simple. And so, so you got to keep that perspective here. And I want to move to, Elliot started to go down a path here. So let's say these guys, you know, find something that they're interested in, passionate about it. Hey, I want to do this entrepreneurial thing. Well, what's it like to start a company? What's the day in the life of an entrepreneur? I think it'd be good to kind of, give some perspective of what it's like, day to day.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I can start. So at Brown, it was interesting. We didn't really know we were starting a company necessarily. So the day-to-day was trying to figure out, as a group of people who were, my group of founders, none of us were software engineers. So the first step was like, how do you build software if you're not a software engineer? And so we beat the street around campus, talked to CS majors. We ended up sort of building a small little office within the MCM, the MCM department's building, and started to build software even though we couldn't. And we bought pizzas for the people that would build the software, quite literally. And we built a prototype. And so that was so day to day on campus, starting a company was organizing, it was meeting, it was sitting around, a keg. It was still college. It was struggling with class, like our schoolwork, for sure. Trying to do both because we were working a full-time job in addition to trying to graduate at the time. And so it was a lot of fun. It was exhilarating. And when we first realized that we were building something that was compelling enough that it was becoming a company, it was, in a lot of ways, it was like, wow, it's a dream come true. That said, there was, I think, going through it, and I'm sure everybody can agree to this, when sort of building a company, there's serious ups and downs. Like, there's serious highs, and the lows are really, really low sometimes. Especially as we begin to build a company, you have real customers, and you have employees. I guess fast forward to now, and more traditional startup life. I think the thing that's awesome about it, and also sometimes the thing that's frustrating about it, is the wearing a lot of hats. You learn a lot, and people joke a lot that once you become an entrepreneur, you can't do anything else. And part of it might be because you're not qualified to do anything else. You're like very good but not excellent at 10 different things. And so one day I spend most of my time sort of running product as our chief product officer. Sometimes I'm running ad tech. Sometimes I'm like being our CRO. And that means you end up sort of getting a broad range of skills. And that's exciting. And then, every Tuesday I'm taking out the trash. So I think it's definitely it's non-glamorous, or I guess it's becoming more glamorous now. But it's non-glamorous in a way that's sort of always really interesting, and just sort of trying to figure out the little things, the high-level things, and the sort of more tactical, low-level things, and taking out the trash. It has to be something that sounds exciting to you, because until you are, Mark Zuckerberg, and there's only one of him, you're just sort of, you're me. You're sort of somebody who's running a successful startup, but still figuring it out on a day-to-day basis. Still trying to, build something that ultimately is going to be a success, and it's a lot of fun.
So I would absolutely echo those comments. At the beginning, and beginning meaning for many years, a startup is an absolute roller coaster. The ups and downs are immense, and I can't tell you the number of times where I've gone in at one of the companies, and in the morning I was sure and was afraid to tell anybody that we were going out of business. And by the afternoon, I was positive and sure, and still didn't want to tell anybody that we were going to sell the company for $1 billion. It's the number of times where, a startup, you literally don't want to get out of bed because you just can't think of all the problems that you got to deal with. And then other days, you can't get out of bed fast enough because you're so excited you want to get to it, you're working on a great deal. It totally is a complete emotional roller coaster. The only thing that's different now that and that I encourage you to think about is that there's today to start a company and to test an idea, and a lot of the venture capitalists look at it and say, you know, there's a sort of some basic requirements that you need. You need engineering, you need to sort of team, a place. But, you know, the real question is, you know, does the dog, you know, did the dog eat the dog, you know, does the dog eat the dog food? You know, is there a market for your product? The great thing today is that you can, with very little capital, I mean, a lot of, you know, sweat on your part, but you can figure out whether or not there's a business there, and you can test a lot of stuff and sort of see what's, you know, what's there, and you can get through that process really quickly if you're, you know, you're sort of focused, and that makes entrepreneurialism today really fun. But it goes back to, you know, what you just heard, that, you know, you've got, you know, sort of moderate skills at 100 different things that you're constantly testing, but you're becoming a great entrepreneur in the meantime. So.
Yeah, day in the life, I would focus on team, basically. So you're forming a small team, and you're playing against the playbook, and it's going to change. But so all the things you like about being a team are going to be even more true as an entrepreneur. And when you think team, you know, you got to pick your teammates really carefully when you're an entrepreneur, because everyone's going to go 24/7. And you want a very small team, and you got to be in one place. I've seen too many companies fail that have teammates that are not real time in the same place with them. Got to be in the same place, one place. And you need to think of your customers, your first customers, your investors, with a lot of respect and like teammates. And you just keep growing the team.
Any job you have, if you don't like what you're doing, it doesn't matter how much money you're going to make, you will be miserable. It's not fun. So, yeah, and you may take a job, you may not know that until later on, but believe me, if you're not having fun, it's not going to last long. All right, I want to thank Elliot, Eric, and Brian.
One final one.
Sure.
And listen to what Mike just said about passion. And if there's anything that you walk out of this, remember that. The other thing I just want to say is, you know, there was a Malcolm Gladwell book that talked about this notion of 10,000 hours to get expertise. And the only thing that I would say with respect to that, and it relates to passion, is that whatever you decide to do when you leave college, don't take the easy way out. Try and find ways that you can learn whatever you're doing. I don't care if it's Teach for America, going to government, being an entrepreneur, going to investment banking. Really try to log into hours early in your career and try and learn whatever you can, because it's the same thing like being an entrepreneur. That time you have now, you may think you're busy. Trust me, when you have kids and you're married and you've got mortgage, you have much less time. Really try and dig in now as much again. Just don't make it, you know, don't take the easy way out.
Great. I want to thank you guys.